Senator, welcome.
Good to be with you, Tom.
Brunch with Bernie with Senator Sanders here. So what's up in the Senate this week?
Well, there is a lot of stuff going on. My mind is kind of focused on what's going on in the Budget Committee because I'm the ranking member there. And we've had two pretty interesting hearings so far, one with the director of the CBO and one with Sean Donovan, who is head of the Office of Management and Budget, the group that writes the budget, helps the president write his budget. So we've had some very good discussions. I think to me, when I look at the situation of the budget, it's absolutely imperative that we write a budget based on the reality of what's happening to ordinary people in America. And what's happening to ordinary people, I think most listeners know, is the middle class continues its 40-year decline. Real unemployment is not 5.8%, it's over 11%. Youth unemployment, 18%. African-American youth unemployment, about 30%. For the family right in the middle of the economy, the median family, that family's inflation accounted for income has gone down by almost $5,000 since 1999. But what we are also seeing, and the numbers are just absolutely almost unbelievable, is a huge transfer of wealth from the middle class to the very, very wealthiest people in this country. What we have seen is that the nation's wealth going to the middle class has gone down from 36% to less than 23% from 1985 to 2013. And if the middle class had simply maintained the same share of the nation's wealth that it had 30 years ago, it would have more than $10 trillion in cumulative wealth. Can you believe that?
Wow. So that's
and then on the other hand, while the middle class continues to shrink, what we have seen just since 2009 is that the top 1% has experienced an $11 trillion increase in its wealth. Wow. So what you're looking at is an economy in which middle class wealth shrinks incredibly, and people on top end up with $11 trillion more in wealth. And where we are right now in terms of distribution of wealth, Tom, is the top 0.1% now owns more wealth than the bottom 90%. A study just came out very recently that in terms of income, since the Wall Street crash, over 99% of all of the new income generated goes to the top 1%, which means that economic growth doesn't mean anything because the people on top, it doesn't mean anything for the middle class because the people on top get it all. So that's where we are. And then you combine that with the fact that just last week, the Koch brothers reminded us that they intend to buy the next elections. They are prepared, along with a few of their friends, to spend some $900 million on the elections. And just stop and think for a second. If you had 2 million people, a lot of people, providing $100 in campaign contributions, that would be $200 million. That's about 20% of what one family is prepared to spend in the next election. And my guess is they're going to end up actually spending a lot more than that. So when you combine the distribution of wealth, the fact that the top 0.1% owns more wealth than the bottom 90%, when you look at income, 99% of all new income going to the top 1%. When you look at campaign spending, in which one family is going to spend close to $1 billion, the second wealthiest family in this country, an extreme right-wing family whose agenda includes ending Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the EPA, giving more tax breaks to the rich, and they're about to buy elections. We have to take a very deep breath and try to figure out where we are as a nation. We are certainly nowhere near being a vigorous democracy. We are moving more and more, in my view, toward an oligarchic form of society. And how do you turn it around? Can we turn it around? There was another story that came out that I thought was very interesting. You and I, Tom, for years have talked about our disastrous trade policies, how NAFTA and CAFTA and permanent normal trade relations with China have cost us millions of decent paying jobs. Well, the largest trade agreement in history is called the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is coming down the pike pretty soon. There was a study done by a group called Media Matters looking at how much coverage the TPP has received on network news. And you know how much coverage it's received, Tom?
With the exception of the Ed Show on MSNBC, it's been zero, basically.
That's right. Virtually nothing. So here you have a huge trade agreement, which in my view will have a horrendous impact on jobs and income in the United States, on prescription drug prices all over the world, on issues of sovereignty, and the networks have decided to provide zero coverage to it. So you got all of these issues out there. You got a media, corporately owned media, which does not cover issues of importance to working families. You got a handful of families owning the political process, and you got a massive transfer of wealth from the middle class to the upper income, to the top 1%. How do you turn that around? Well, anyone who tells you it's easy won't be telling you the truth. But several facts are pretty clear. If we continue to have elections where 63% of the people don't vote, as was the case in the last midterm election, you surely are not going to turn it about. If you have a situation where 63% of the people, as a poll indicated a year ago, don't know which party controls the House or the Senate, we don't know much about the budget, we're not going to turn it around. So what our job is got to be is to, what I often say is create a political revolution in this country, which means change political consciousness so that ordinary people understand, maybe as much as the Koch brothers, how important the political process is. When you hear people out there saying, oh, politics is all crap, all the politicians are the liars and thieves and everything else, I'm not going to vote. Ask yourself why the second wealthiest family in this country is going to spend close to $1 billion on campaigns. They're not fools. They understand that who controls Congress is pretty important. They think it's important. Working people should also think it's important. And then what we need to do is not only change consciousness so that people are involved in running for office in the political process. We have got to have a progressive agenda. Well, what do we do? What do we want? Where do we want to go? And I think we have to be very clear. We need to create millions and millions of decent paying jobs. How do you do that? Well, among other things, you rebuild our crumbling infrastructure. We have introduced legislation that calls for, along with Senator Barbara Mikulski, that invests $1 trillion in our infrastructure over a 5-year period. Tom, that creates 13 million decent paying jobs. How's that for a start?
Yeah, that's a great start. Exactly what we need. Senator Bernie Sanders with us. It's our Brunch with Bernie hour, our national town hall meeting. Senator Sanders taking your calls and offering answers to your questions. We'll be right back with Senator Sanders.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And be sure to check out Bernie's website, sanders.senate.gov. You can sign up for the Bernie Buzz, and you can hop over to Facebook and check out his Facebook page, too. So, Senator, pick up some phone calls?
Let's do it.
Okay. Paul in South Lyon, Michigan. You are on the air, Paul.
Yeah, thanks. The president is being demonized over the TPP by allies of Ralph Nader, the guy that gave us 8 years of suffering under Bush. After NAFTA was passed under President Clinton, we had the largest economic expansion in history, 23 million jobs, rising wages. If NAFTA was so bad, why did the economy do so good after it was passed? And also, do you think it's possible that the president is negotiating a deal that will benefit us by raising standards in other countries?
Well, Paul, during the Clinton years, we did see a significant increase in job growth. That is true. And by the way, at the end of the Clinton administration, this country was running, I believe, a $238 billion surplus. So there's a lot to be said about that. But I think the facts with regard to NAFTA is that NAFTA, CAFTA, and permanent normal trade relations with China, those trade agreements have in fact been a disaster for this country. And one of the manifestations of that is that while we grew jobs, in many ways, real inflation accounted for wages went down. So you have a situation today where workers, male workers, for example, are making hundreds of dollars a year less than they did 41 years ago. Because since 2001, we have lost 60,000 factories in this country and millions of good paying jobs. So, Paul, I happen to be one who voted against NAFTA and the other trade agreements. I think it is not fair for American workers to be forced to compete, say in Vietnam, against people in Vietnam who have a minimum wage of 56 cents an hour. So count me in as somebody who does not believe these trade agreements have worked for American workers. They have been pushed by Wall Street, the Chamber of Commerce, corporate America, and I think we need fundamental changes in our trade policies.
Devon in Blacksburg, Virginia. You're on the air with Senator Sanders.
Hey, great. Senator, I'm wondering if y'all have been paying attention to what's going on in the House Oversight Committee regarding EPA's failure. They've been blocked by the Inspector General, and the EPA Inspector General, Mr. Elkins, testified on the 3rd to EPA, likening the exception that's been carved out for Homeland Security, as in the Inspector General can't look at what's going on at some EPA facilities. He likened this statute for the IG to a house of cards that's about to fall, and I think that
Devon, we just have 30 seconds left for Senator Sanders.
Well, Devon, I apologize. I don't know all of the details of what you are talking about. What I do know, and this is certainly no great secret, is the Republican Party is hell-bent on taking apart the EPA and the EPA's ability not only to regulate greenhouse gas emissions, but various levels and various types of pollution. And that is going on 24/7. The EPA is right in their sights, and they're going to do everything they can to weaken and dismantle the EPA.
We'll be back with more of Senator Sanders right after this. It's 20 minutes past the hour on the Thom Hartmann Program. Twenty minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. Talk media for the sane among us. It's Senator Bernie Sanders with us for our Brunch with Bernie Hour, our national town hall meeting. And Mike in Chicago. You're on the air with Senator Sanders.
Senator Sanders, it's great to talk to you. In the Chicago Tribune this week, it talked about TPP is going to be pretty much wrapped up in March. In that same article, Senator Mark Kirk and Representative Adam Kinzinger, who came in 2010 on the Tea Party platform, both have said they have a problem giving up our sovereignty over trade, which this would do, and they also said they have a problem with not being able to add no amendments or possibly filibuster, which is they don't want to give up that power. Can you comment on this?
Sure. Mark, what that is about is when you look at the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or in fact any trade agreement, you're looking at two separate processes. Number one, what's in the bill? And understand that this is a bill that has thousands of pages and a lot of very complicated legalese in it. So that's one thing. Who benefits from this trade agreement? Who gets hurt by this trade agreement? Do the American people understand what's in this trade agreement? As I mentioned a moment ago, The major networks have covered zero of it, but that's another story. So that's one issue. Then the second issue is the process about how we get to vote on the trade agreement. And what that is about is what's called fast track, or giving the president the authority to go forward and negotiate the agreement with 11 other countries or 12 other countries. In the Senate, the major battle will be over fast track, because for that to get approved, it requires 60 votes. To pass the trade agreement will only require 50 votes. And the argument here is, the most important argument, to my mind, is the absolute lack of transparency that has been in the fast track process. Right now, if a member of the United States Senate or House wants to learn what's in this multi-thousand page, very complicated agreement, 25 separate chapters, one can go in and look at it, but you can't copy any of the information. You can't bring in a trade expert in with you. So in a sense, the elected officials of this country who are asked to vote on whether or not we go forward really have no way of fully understanding what is in the document, what it means to their constituency. So it would seem to me that if for no other reason, even if one liked what one ended up seeing, one should vote against fast track, because there has been virtually no transparency. And that's what that is about, Mike.
Okay. Jim in Lockport, Illinois, are on the air with Senator Sanders.
Good afternoon, Tom. Good afternoon, Senator Sanders.
Jim.
Last Thursday, you gave a great presentation on the Senate floor after the Keystone vote on income inequality. And you had a nice chart up there that showed that the income inequality started under the Reagan administration and continued to grow. Now we hear Republicans, they're talking about income inequality. And they have the nerve to blame our president on that. Yet they still want to give tax breaks to the rich, like the Koch brothers, who say they want to spend $900 million on buying our next election. And to me, that they should be ashamed, because they can't afford to pay more.
So, Jim, your question?
My question is this: isn't, now that the Republicans are talking about income inequality, isn't that an indictment of trickle-down economics?
Yes, it is, Jim. Absolutely. And the chart that I had, and maybe at some point, Tom, I'll bring that chart down here, we can put it on the screen, was very interesting. What Jim is talking about is there's a chart out there that showed that going way back to the late 40s, the 50s, what type of, who benefited and who received the most income during economic recoveries. So when you had a recovery back in the 40s and 50s, the overwhelming beneficiaries of that recovery were the bottom 90% of the people. That's where the money went. And what you see as a result of trickle-down economics is from 1982 to the present, increasingly the beneficiaries of economic recovery are the top 1%. And right now you're seeing the most extreme numbers where virtually all of the benefits are going to the top 1%. So what I was talking about is my view that trickle-down economic theory, which says that to create jobs we need to give tax breaks to the rich and large corporations, we need more deregulation, just the way we deregulated Wall Street. That makes no sense at all if you're talking about the needs of the middle class and working families. So trickle-down economics is totally discredited. It's not just the theory. In reality, it has failed. We need an alternative approach. And the point that I made on the floor is, Tom, we hear a whole lot of discussion about the so-called job creators. That's what the Republicans talk about. Well, you know who the job creators are? The job creators are the people who are listening to this program. The job creators are the middle class and working class of this country, who every day go out and they buy products and they buy services. And the reality is that if working families do not have disposable income to go out and purchase, then companies can't create jobs. You could have the smartest CEO in the world, But that CEO can't sell a product if people do not have the money to buy that product. 70% of our economy is based on consumer consumption. Wall Street Journal just the other day had an interesting article, and they're talking about a two-tier economy. For the rich, for the companies that sell to the rich, they're doing really well. For companies that sell to the middle class, they're in a lot of trouble because the middle class doesn't have the money to buy what it needs.
It's our Brunch with Bernie hour. Senator Bernie Sanders taking your calls in our national town hall meeting. Brunch with Bernie. We'll be back with more of your calls for the senator right after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-536-2370.
And you can check out Bernie's website at sanders.senate.gov. And, of course, you can track him down on Facebook. He's got a very active Facebook page. Thom Hartmann here on the best of the rest of economic and labor news. You need to know this. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have been talking a lot about the middle class. That talk is cheap as long as they're in bed with Wall Street. 6 years ago, our economic system came crashing down thanks to degenerate gamblers and their bankster buddies on Wall Street. That crash left 23 million Americans without jobs and got 1 million families kicked out of their homes. But our legislators are actually helping Wall Street set up the same house of cards all over again. According to a recent article by former Labor Secretary Robert Reich, the middle class can't be saved unless Wall Street is tamed. As Secretary Reich explains, the banks that brought down our economy have only gotten bigger since the financial crash. Back in 2000, the 5 largest banks in our country held 25% of America's banking assets. Today, they hold almost half. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve continues to keep interest rates near zero, which means that Wall Street can borrow money cheaper than ever and use it to gamble on high-risk bets. Too-big-to-jail banks like Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan worked hard to keep financial regulations like Dodd-Frank from having any real bite, and now they've managed to wipe out what little protection that regulation provided to the American people. Members of Congress and 2016 presidential hopefuls have been swept up in a wave of talking points about saving the middle class. But they're not doing anything to stop the monster that destroyed the middle class in the first place. And they're unlikely to do anything that might weaken the stream of corporate cash that flows into their campaigns. Until our legislators put Main Street ahead of Wall Street, they won't risk upsetting the banksters. And all their claims about saving the middle class will be nothing but talk. It's up to us to remind them that talk is cheap, and we want to see some action when it comes to regulating Wall Street. There is a new up-and-coming industry in our country. According to new data from the ArcView Group, legal cannabis is the fastest-growing industry in the United States. Researchers from that investment research firm found that the legal pot industry grew by 74% between 2013 and 2014. Using data from state agencies, nonprofits, and private industry, ArcView calculated that the 2014 market for legal cannabis was $2.7 billion, up from $1.5 billion in the previous year. Troy Dalton, ArcView's CEO, said, "At this point, it's hard to imagine that any serious business person who is paying attention hasn't spent some time thinking about the possibilities of this market." Just a few years ago, talking about the cannabis industry meant a conversation about crime or another country, and today it means billions of dollars of legal sales, jobs, and tax revenue right here at home. This report projects that recreational and medical marijuana will create an $11 billion market by 2019, which means that legal pot will be bringing us even more benefits in the future. Greece has had enough of austerity. Last week, the anti-austerity Syriza party won Greece's general election with a clear mandate against bailouts and the destruction of that nation's social safety net. Newly elected Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras promised to renegotiate Greece's debt and to reverse the harsh austerity measures that have wreaked havoc on the people of that nation and its economy. In response to the election results, leaders from other European Union nations expressed concern about the promises made by the new leader. But that doesn't seem to be intimidating Mr. Tsipras one bit. Rather than worrying about the EU, the IMF, and the European Central Bank, a.k.a. the Troika, the new party is focusing on the needs of the Greek people, and they could inspire similar groups in other nations. The election could spark the beginning of the end of austerity in the European Union, and hopefully the rest of the world as well. 16 states in our nation have more people in prisons than in college dormitories. According to a recent analysis over at Vox.com, it's clear that we need to do more to address mass incarceration, which may start with changing our priorities. Our nation spends billions every year locking people up for minor nonviolent offenses instead of investing more in education that could help people avoid a life of crime to begin with. Although the map over at Vox doesn't include college students who are living off campus, it illustrates how many people we're putting in a jail cell instead of a classroom. This is not the type of nation we should be building, and we need to change our priorities as a nation. Let's stop spending money to destroy people's futures with a criminal record and preventing them from voting as well, and start investing in their future by giving them a college education. And finally, the U.S. budget deficit will shrink again in 2015, but other important deficits will continue to grow without congressional action. According to Senator Bernie Sanders, it's time for lawmakers to address our deficits in education, trade, infrastructure, retirement security, and jobs. Last week, the Congressional Budget Office projected that our budget deficit would total $468 billion at the end of September, the lowest it's been since 2007. However, Senator Sanders' report says that the CBO won't tell us about the suffering of tens of millions of Americans who are part of the disappearing middle class and who worry about the kind of economy we will be leaving to their kids. End of quote. His report explains how and why we must address these other deficits to regrow our middle class and put our nation back on a path to shared prosperity. For far too long, our lawmakers in Congress have been obsessed with the debt and budget deficit and have forgotten how we built the American dream in the first place. If we want to go back to being that great nation, it's time to focus on the deficits that Senator Sanders lays out in his new report. And that's the way it is for the week of February 2nd, 2015. I'm Thom Hartmann on Economic and Labor News. Before the hour, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's our Brunch with Bernie hour. Senator Bernie Sanders taking your calls. And David in Wilmington, Delaware, you are on the air with Senator Sanders.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Senator Sanders. My question is, there's two parts. I want to know the variables that keep a person from voting, and I wonder if there will be any movement and I'm sure it would be a Democrat, by the Democratic Party to get this thing overturned where felons cannot vote. I think that hurts Democrats in every election, and it is a way that the 1% keep control over us by keeping felons. And I wonder what other variables.
Got it, David. Thank you.
Particularly the minority.
Yep. Thank you, David.
Right. Well, thank you, David. And David asked a very, very important question. And it gets to the question as to the nature of American democracy today. In the last election, 63% of the American people didn't vote. 80% of young people didn't vote. 80% of low-income workers didn't vote. Now, that was an off-presidential election. Those numbers go up during a presidential election. But what that speaks to, in my mind, is the alienation of the American people from the political process and their demoralization. The American people are hurting. The middle class is disappearing. Poverty is almost at an all-time high. We have lost millions of decent-paying jobs. Most of the new jobs being created are part-time and low-wage. And Americans look to Washington and they say, what are you doing? Who are you representing? Are you relevant to my life? I can't afford to send my kid to college. I can't afford childcare. I have to work 2 or 3 jobs to make a living. What are you doing about it? And they look into Washington, and it turns out that in Washington, Koch brothers and other billionaires are putting huge amounts of money into the political process. And Congress says, Koch brothers, what do you want? You don't want us to raise the minimum wage? Hey, we're there with you. You want us to deny that climate change is real and caused by human activities? Hey, count us in. We're with you. You want us to have more unfettered free trade so you can ship jobs to China or Vietnam? hey, we're with you. And the American people are saying, why do I want to participate in this charade? And I'm going to stay home. So I think, David, that is at the heart of why voter turnout is so low. And I think there is no easy antidote to that. It's going to take a lot of grassroots education and organizing. It's going to take really strong candidates at the local level, the state level, for national office, who are bringing people together around a progressive agenda, who remind people of what Abraham Lincoln talked about, that government is supposed to be of the people, by the people, and for the people, not for the billionaires. Now, that's not easy stuff. You turn on television, the most important issues facing us, not even discussed. Talk radio, 95% of talk radio is right-wing, which is why I love this show, and why Tom and I have worked together for so many years. It's an alternative point of view. But this is tough stuff, how you get lower-income people, working people involved in the political process. And then David asked about felons. Well, felons overwhelmingly will be lower-income people who commit crimes. And then they're disbarred from the political process. Yes, we, of course, have got to rethink that. People who have paid their time, did their time, paid their obligations to society, bring them back into the democratic process.
And, just a quick announcement, Senator Sanders will be speaking at the Pennsylvania Progressive Summit in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, tomorrow morning at 10 in the morning. That's February 7th. For more information, go to PA, as in Pennsylvania, progressivesummit.net. Didn't want to forget to get that in there, Bernie. Anthony in Bethpage, New York. You're on the air with Senator Sanders.
How you doing? So this disintegration of the middle class and the growth in poverty occurred under 35 years of rule by both Democrats and Republicans. Democrats had the White House for half the time. Why should I trust the Democratic Party just because the Democrats are worse, because the Republicans are worse? Because I'm not seeing anything truly progressive happening, and this is why I occupied Wall Street. I don't have faith in either of those parties. That's my question.
Well, Anthony raises a reasonable question, and I trust, as you know, Anthony, I am an independent, the longest-serving independent in the history of the United States Congress. Was elected as a mayor, congressman, senator as an independent. And I think where we are politically is that you have right now a Republican Party which over the years has evolved from a center-right party, the party of Dwight D. Eisenhower, who built the largest public works program up to then in our history, the interstate highway system, who proudly talked about raising the minimum wage, etc., to a right-wing extremist party under the dominance of the Koch brothers who want to abolish Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, etc. And then you have a Democratic Party, which, under FDR, I think could honestly be called the party of the American working class. You had a president who was prepared to stand up to what he called the economic royalist of his time. I call them the billionaire class of our time, and took them on and stood with working people. And in 1936, he won 46 out of 48 states. But that party, the Democratic Party, has also evolved to be a party significantly impacted by big money. And I think, Anthony, the question you have to resolve, and it's a tough question, is the Democratic Party more progressive than the Republican Party? There is no debate about that. Yes, they are. Within the Democratic Party, there are some very strong voices of people who are trying to do exactly the right thing, to stand up to big money, to raise the minimum wage, to deal with the scandal of overtime, to deal with pay equity, to deal with these disastrous trade agreements, to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, to deal with climate change. All of those people are in the Democratic Party, and some of them are quite progressive. But if your point is the party as a whole terribly progressive? I think the answer is no, it is a centrist party. And then you, Anthony, and a lot of other people have to make political decisions based on that. So that's kind of where it is. It is. You have an extreme right-wing party, and I think it's important that we do everything that we can to stop their growth. But you have a Democratic Party which is not anywhere near as strong as it should be in representing working families.
John in Chicago, listening on WCPT. You're on the air with Senator Sanders.
Hello, Senator Sanders. I'm calling about the cuts to Social Security disability, and where they say it's going to be 20%. Okay, now I did some math on this, and if they cut down 20% for the $9 million, it's not going to make the program last at all. Actually, it's a farce, and we know it, because all they're going to do is get their toe in the Social Security, and then they're going to try to destroy the programs they so hate. The other problem I have in seeing this is I'm grateful to see that there are some disabled people that still have employment and employers making arrangements for them.
Right. John, is there a question in there for the senator?
Well, I know what the question is,
Okay.
Tom, because
Got it. Thank you,
I'm
John.
on the committee that's dealing with. John, thank you very much for raising the issue. I was going to try to get to it later in the. What John is referring to is the fact that on the very first day of this new congressional session, the Republicans passed a rule which essentially said they would not allow to happen what has happened 11 times in recent history on the Democratic and Republican parties, and that is the reallocation of money from one pot within Social Security to the other, two major pots. The retiree pot, the larger pot for older people, which most people refer to as Social Security, but there's another pot which provides benefits for 10 million people, which is the disability program. And the disability program is going to run out of funds next year. What has always happened, because they're paid for out of the same source of money, is when the older retiree pot had money was simply transferred into the disability pot. When the older pot, the pot for older people was running out of money, they took money from the disability pot. That's what they did. Republicans are saying we don't want to do that. If they don't do that, that will require a 19% cut in benefits. There's going to be a hearing in the Budget Committee next week on Wednesday on just that issue. Here is the point. What the Republicans have done is created a phony crisis. There is no crisis. 11 times in recent years, we have made these transfers. What they are trying to do is, I think John indicates, is begin the process of dismantling and cutting Social Security. And what they want to do is create a situation where they're going to try to target the disability community against the seniors and the seniors against the disability community. Now, the good news, John, is that the AARP, the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, the Alliance for Retired Americans, all of the senior organizations are standing with people with disabilities and saying, do not cut programs for disabled Americans. These are some of the most vulnerable people in this country. Many are children, 1 million are veterans. These are people who are suffering from terrible diseases, etc. So we are going to fight as hard as we can to make people understand that Social Security is not going broke, that in fact there is a $2.8 trillion surplus in the program. It could pay out all benefits to all older Americans and disabled Americans for the next 18 years, period.
We will be back with more of your questions for Senator Sanders in our Brunch with Bernie hour. Senator Sanders taking your questions in our national town hall meeting. Be sure to check out Bernie's websites, sanders.senate.gov, bernie.org. There's a Facebook page, plug Senator Sanders in, and you can tweet him at Senator Sanders.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
At sanders.senate.gov. We'll be right back. Fifteen minutes before the hour, Anita in San Antonio, Texas, watching Free Speech TV on the DirecTV satellite. You're on the air with Senator Sanders.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Senator Sanders.
Hi, Anita.
Senator Sanders, do you have any idea why President Obama supports the TPP? And do you think there's any chance we could change his mind? Or will we have to completely rely on Congress to stop it? And what are the chances of that?
Anita, the truth is, I don't think you're going to change President Obama's mind on this issue. I think he is taking the position that President Bush took before him. that President Clinton took before him, that President Bush the first took before him, and that Ronald Reagan took, and that is that unfettered free trade works for America. I think our hope lies in the Congress. I have been working with members in the House. To the best of my knowledge, the vast majority of Democrats are opposed to this agreement. There are some Republicans who, for their reasons, are also opposed. I think the fight is going to be harder in the Senate, which has historically been more sympathetic to free trade than the House. But I think my understanding is that we do have a shot to defeat this in the House.
Floyd in Terra Alta, West Virginia, watching Free Speech TV on DirecTV. You're on the air, Senator Sanders.
Thank you, Tom, for taking my call. Senator Sanders, thank you for everything you've done. I got a couple things. First of all, I want to tell you that the people I talk to want you to run as a strict independent, and we need a progressive partner to go with you. My question is why, with all the states in this country has made marijuana legal either for medical or for normal use, why our government hasn't changed the policy and took it off of Schedule 1 whenever the majority of the states has already said that it's legal in this country, you know? I'd like to know why somebody hasn't introduced a bill to get it off of there. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Floyd. I think what you are seeing is a significant evolution on this issue. Colorado has legalized marijuana. There is a lot of debate in my state and states all over the country to move in that direction. I think people are trying to ascertain what is going on in Colorado, how well it is working, what problems may be arising. But I would say, Floyd, like in many other issues, things don't happen overnight. But clearly the trend is to decriminalize. I think you're seeing more and more states decriminalizing marijuana, people who have small amounts of it. And that is the direction that it is moving in. You have, on the other hand, law enforcement folks who worry about marijuana leading to cocaine, leading to heroin, which is a very serious problem, and that's kind of where the debate is right now. But there's no question that I think the trend is toward a liberal direction in terms of marijuana.
Yeah, and a fine thing it is. It seems that there's also some pushback from the pharmaceutical and tobacco industries. Yep. We will be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Senator Bernie Sanders here taking your questions. More of your questions for Bernie right after this. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Senator Sanders on the line with us from the Senate recording studio. Joe in Clarks Summit, Pennsylvania. You're on the air with Senator Sanders.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Senator Sanders, you brought up a great point before about voter disenfranchisement, that it keeps people back from the polls. But I'm 30 years old, and many of my friends and colleagues, we simply do not vote just because the day. I mean, especially it's a Tuesday. It's the middle of the work week. Many people don't work and live in the same districts, so it's just impossible for us without having to take the day off of work or at least leave work and have a significant pay cut for the day's work to go and vote. And the people that do show up to the polls are the people who are retired, and they have nothing better to do than to go to the polls. So, I mean, we need to do something about changing, if not changing it from a Tuesday to a weekend or some national holiday, at least keeping it open later the polls than 7 o'clock. I mean, we have better access to the malls than we do the
Well,
polls.
Joe, you raise a very important point, and as you may know, I have introduced legislation to make Election Day a national holiday for exactly the reasons that you have given us. Number one, there are, and the length of time or how late polls stay open is dependent upon the state. But the truth of the matter is, if we are serious about encouraging people to participate in the political process, it is not a good idea that in some states, as Joe indicated, people drive off to work. They're going to have to race back, or maybe they can't even make it to the polls. I think if we respect and appreciate American democracy, then we can at least devote one day a year, one day every 2 years at least, to making sure that everybody has the opportunity to participate, that they're thinking about democracy, they're thinking about the election, not to mention having the time to go out to vote. So my view is, Joe, that we should take a hard look at why our voter turnout is so low. We should do everything that we can to increase voter turnout, and having a one day every 2 years, making that a national holiday, call it Democracy Day, I think is what we should do for all the reasons you gave.
Rudy in Riverside, Illinois. You're on the air with Senator Sanders.
Senator, when will you and other progressives in the Congress propose a transaction tax, a carbon tax, and go to paper ballots in elections? Larry Summers just this week proposed a carbon tax when he was on Charlie Rose's program. So if he's for it, maybe some others will be for it.
All right, Rudy, let me give you the news. About 2 years ago, Senator Barbara Boxer and I introduced legislation which included a carbon tax. I happen to think that climate change is the major planetary environmental crisis that we face. I think a very effective way of cutting carbon is to tax carbon emissions, and that's what we did several years ago. And I think there is momentum for that. Number two, in terms of a transaction fee on Wall Street, we have also been on board that. We have introduced legislation. Senator Thom Hartmann introduced legislation. And if we are serious about wanting to damper and slow down speculation on Wall Street, this is a step forward. It's a smart thing to do, and it also brings in a substantial sum of money. So on those two issues, I think you're seeing some of us already on board. What was your third point? What was the third point, Tom?
Paper ballots, transaction
paper
tax.
Ballots. That's a decision being made by the states, and some states, I believe, Tom, are moving in that direction.
Yeah.
Is that not right?
Yeah, Oregon, Washington State, Colorado, increasingly. Yeah, with the mail-in voting. Okay, David in Mill City, Oregon. You're on the air with Senator Sanders.
Hello, Senator, and thank you. Thank you especially for your comments on the TPP, though I think you're grossly understating the impact of the provision that requires us to pay to regulate. Because the first stage you're doing, a first stage of that law, you're doing a good job of, other than you've missed the little detail.
David, what's your question?
Taxes reduce profits. Is there a reason that you haven't gotten to the second stage, which is that we have to start repealing laws because we can't afford to pay for the regulation?
That doesn't make sense to me.
Well, I think you want to repeal laws that don't make any sense. You want to strengthen laws that do make sense. But I think as a general principle, you don't go around repealing laws if they are working effectively. And I would say, by the way, when we talk about the issue of regulation or deregulation, you got to look at the specifics. I was one of those when I was in the House who fought very, very hard against the deregulation of Wall Street. Did not believe that it was a good idea to allow huge insurance companies to merge with huge banks and so forth and so on. Well, turns out I was right. And I think we have to re-regulate those institutions very strongly, but even more importantly, we've got to start to break them up. So, David, there's a time for regulation, there's a time for deregulation. But I think in many instances, what we need to do is make sure that corporate America does not develop practices which are harmful to working families, and they need to be regulated.
Senator, we have just a minute left. You want to share your thoughts on the coming week?
Yeah, let me get back to an issue which is very much on my mind. It was raised earlier in the program, and that is this attack on Social Security. The Republicans are going to create a phony crisis by telling us that the disability part of the program is running out of money. Once again, the funding comes from one source, which is the payroll tax. 11 times in recent history, under Republican and Democratic presidents, with no controversy at all, money was transferred from one pot to the other. That is what the president proposed in his budget. That is exactly what we should be doing. The long-term game plan of the Republicans is to use this as an attack on Social Security, both the disability program and the old age program. We must not allow them to succeed.
Senator, thanks so much once again for being with us this week. Thank you.
My pleasure.